everybody, and welcome to session four. Am I right?
Yeah, four.
Session four of the Flourish podcast, where we're exploring healthy, holistic, and reflective children's and youth ministry. I'm Lisa Campbell. I lead something called Wonderful Me, which is all about supporting churches to journey well with every child, including those who've experienced trauma, who are displaying challenging behavior, who have additional needs. Like, how do we create safe, inclusive environments for every child? And I'm with Ali Campbell, my husband. Such a weird old word, husband, isn't it? Anyway,
It is
we're
wife.
married, just to let that know. Al, do you want to introduce yourself? Do you
Yeah,
need an
my name's
introduction?
Ali. Lisa is my wife. We have two wonderful daughters, and I run the resource and also Paraclesis. There we go. That's me.
Brilliant. So yeah, thanks for tuning in again. If you've been on this little journey with us, we are on a whole series exploring something called the Flourish model, which probably we should have mentioned earlier. There is a graphic that goes with the Flourish model that's available as a free download on the Wonderful Me website. So yeah, check that out if you are a bit of a visual person and kind of just want to have a bit of a graphic, an image that sums up what we're talking about. So anyway, we've been digging into that. We've done a bit of an introduction. We've explored it as a model. We started with the roots and exploring the why. And this week we are jumping into the second bit of it, which is all about the how. How do we go about the approach that we bring as we are journeying with children and young people in our churches or organization spaces, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. But the how in the Flourish model is the stem of the flower. It's the bit that kind of holds it all up. And I think it's the bit in ministry that is often most overlooked. Like we often, well, we hugely spend a lot of time sitting in the what, the kind of flower, and we are going to get to that. It's good to do some good what, and have some good practice in place. And then occasionally we might also explore our why. We might look at our values and our vision and our passion, and kind of unpack that. But rarely, I think, do we talk about how we're actually going to do it. And actually, just like in a flower, the stem is what holds it all up. Actually, the how, the approach that we bring is the thing often that means that what we do works or doesn't. So it's bizarre that we don't talk about it.
It is bizarre, and I think part of the thing for me that makes it even more bizarre is of all the things that change, and culture, context, all kinds of things can change in terms of what we actually end up doing with young people and children in terms of ministry. But I've found the approach generally it rarely shifts once you've nailed it and recognize what works and what's effective. And it isn't the kind of having the right program or having the kind of best resources. It is how we go about what we're doing.
Mm.
So for me, it is odd that we don't spend much time, as you say, talking about this.
Why do you think we don't? I'm sat going, so why do we not? Because actually it's crucial. Like the stem is on a flower, it's what feeds it. It's what, draws up the nutrients from the roots. It's what gives it structure. It's what holds it like. And I think it's the approach that we bring is just as important for what we're doing as the stem is in a flower.
Because I think we misunderstand something like reflective practice. So if we do it at all, we focus our reflection on the kind of what we're doing in terms of the activity. But if we're
Mm.
thinking about that properly, we should be thinking about how we're doing it, not just what we're doing. And so it's having a proper approach to reflective practice will help us see, oh, right, because that was how I approached that situation, it keeps happening, as opposed to this happens when young people play pool. Maybe we should stop playing pool. Well,
Mm.
maybe it's the approach. When does it happen within the evening? How are young people engaging with one another when they arrive? What do we do that enables young people to settle, feel comfortable, feel okay about being in the same space together? And that's all to do with our approach, not the actual activities themselves. So we don't often think about it and unpick kind of how we're doing what we're doing. As
Yeah.
we've talked about before, we focus very much on the what.
No, it's really good. And I do think the approach is actually, it's possibly maybe not spoken about so much because in some ways it can feel a bit woolly. Like, how do you actually nail that? How do you, with your, for those who are kind of leading teams, how do you really articulate what your approach? Because it's kind of the understood, like you like we're gonna unpack a little bit about the approach that you kind of brought and formed and used, but it's kind of been quite an instinctive thing. And it's almost like you kind of have it or you don't, or you assume that everyone is just going to bring the same approach that you bring. So you kind of assume that your volunteers aren't going to shout at kids who are
Yeah.
like in a bit of a meltdown space. So, and actually when we don't articulate it, when we don't talk about it, we all know what is said about the word assume. So we shouldn't assume it. And actually, it's really important to make that stuff clear and to really articulate it. But I wonder if part of the reason we don't talk about it is it's kind of tricky to nail down, really, and can feel a bit woolly.
I only nailed it down when I was going for a job. So
Yeah.
we were
Yeah.
moving
So Al,
from
so you talk us through because you have kind of formulated this brilliant approach that you've picked up, and well, I think it's brilliant.
it. It doesn't work as an
I would
acronym.
say I'm biased, but I'm generally not. No,
It
like,
doesn't work as an acronym because at the time I wasn't fully on board with acronyms as I am now in terms of they've got to be words that kind of I can just, set the bar and other things I've done. But anyway, this one, basically, I was asked this question for an interview. What do young people need? And I think you can ask that question and then you can come up with lots of whats. But it really made me think, well, actually, beyond the how do we approach our work with young people that seeks to meet their needs through the way in which we're going about it, not just the activity? And because that was the question I was asked, I then started to dig into kind of some of what I felt was essential in terms of how we make young people feel safe, how we make them feel significant and included. So I just came up with four things that I think all young people need. They need acceptance, love, guidance, and significance. And for this job interview, I had to unpack those things in 8 minutes. Now, if anybody knows me, 8 minutes is a very short amount of time for me to do anything. But I got the job. So, and that was what moved us from St Paul's in Ealing, which is where we were at the time, down to Sussex, and I became the youth and children's advisor for the Diocese of Chichester at the time. So, but that was part of my interview, and that was
and
2005. So that was over 20 years ago.
how did you formulate that? Did you kind of mine it from things you'd read, or was it all your gut instinct? Or
I think some of it was gut. I think some of it was just what I'd seen from my practice over time. So when I approached things with a generosity towards young people, regardless of where they were at, and just like, well, I've got to accept them as they are.
mm,
And something I used to and still do in training is you've got the youth group you've got, not the one you wish you had. And part of that is about being really thankful for who's in the room and appreciating who they are. And often talk about the need for us to challenge our perceptions around certain young people, where some kids come and we think, great, they're here tonight. Other kids come and we roll our eyes. Now, if that child sees that, how do they feel? So for me, that had to be a thing that just acceptance is key. Because if that child notices, I couldn't care less whether they're here or not. Actually, I'm really bothered they are here because I think they're going to change everything in a not a good way. How does that child sees that kids
mm.
aren't stupid. They spot those things. They know whether you want to be with them or not. And that makes a difference to whether or not anything you can do with those children will be effective or not.
And I love that what I'm hearing. Sorry, I was laughing at myself because I went to interrupt, took a massive breath. Anyway, what I love what I'm hearing from that kind of acceptance is, and that whole thing of you've got the youth group you've got, not the youth group you'd like to have. Just that is so crucial and so key, isn't it? Because if if you're continually planning a program for the youth group you'd like to have, what you're doing is creating a very program-led
Mm.
approach. And so you're just creating activities, regardless of who is in the room. This is what we're going to do because this is what we do. It's like the run up to Christmas, and this is what our run up to Christmas looks like. And you kind of can get into just this is what we do at this time of year, or this is what we do for this occasion, or whatever it is. This is our program, and this is what we do, regardless of who is in the room. But actually, that deep acceptance of who's in the room and that kind of real thing of noticing that and really getting to know the kids then should really have an impact on our what.
Mm.
So our how should really direct the what. Because if we're really kind of thinking about who's in the room, that should change what we do. It shouldn't just be a case of, I know how to do Wednesday night youth work,
Mm.
and this is what I do, regardless of who. Well, like that kind of September every year should look different because every year you've got different kids in the room,
Yeah,
and that's the difference between a really a relational approach that is about who have I got in the room, what do they need, where are they at, where are we going, and then we shape what we're going to do around that.
yeah. And I think that so what one of the clips I used when I think about so acceptance is kind of there as a kind of you've got to start there.
Mm,
And then what does love look like? So I was thinking about that in terms of like God loves everyone, therefore we should love everyone. And then I was like, well, I don't love everyone. Some people are really annoying. So how does that work? And this is showing you how long ago it was I did this interview with these. I used some clips. So one of the clips was from The Incredibles, and it was Dash sat in the car chatting to his mum, and basically he was saying, "But I'm special. I'm really, really valuable, really important, and I want every child to know that." And then his mum says, "Dash, everyone's special." And they said, "Well, that just means, it's like saying no one is, because if we're all special, the kind of thing is what makes me special." And I think sometimes we can talk to children generally about God loves everyone. Does that child hear that for themselves?
mm,
Or do they just hear that as a general thing for everyone, but they don't relate it to their own life or experience? So part of us demonstrating that is a key part of our work with children and young people. You are loved, not just everyone in the room, you. And how we, again, that's approach. That's not the activities we're doing or not. It's how we approach working with children.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, and we have to know those kids well to know how to love them well. Which again is all about we have to get to know the kids. And really seek God's perspective. Like, you know, God loves every child that's in the room, even if we
Yeah.
find some a little bit more challenging. So, like, that's got to be our prayer, hasn't it? Like, God, give me your heart for this child. Help me see them the way that you see them, because you see them and see treasure, and you sing and you rejoice, and your heart sings when you made each child and as they are now. And so, like, how do we get that perspective on every? Sorry,
And that,
this
so
is
that's
where I like.
that's acceptance and
Ah,
love.
this,
I know.
this, this is what we need.
So that's acceptance and love. And then guidance is basically, I nicked a thing in my own head, not at the time I did the interview, but subsequently I've added this, is Mark Yaconelli writing Contemplative Youth Ministry in 2006. So that is a long time ago. Um, but he basically says we need guides, not gurus. And I think one of the challenges around how we approach teaching, for example, is we've got the wisdom, let us impart it to you, and you just sit there as a student, child or young person, and learn from me. And I think there's still lots of practice that looks like that. Barely any space for questions or reflection from the young people. They don't get to feed in. And apart from we've set the tone, we've set the parameters for a discussion rather than we see where something goes. And so that kind of idea of being guides, not gurus, is really important. It's like we're on a journey, we're on a shared journey. So guidance for me is about we may be a little bit further along the journey, but we're still pilgrims with you. Um, we're not so far ahead that we can't learn from you about what the journey looks like. And if we're not willing to learn from the children, we can miss so much about what the journey looks like for us as adults.
Mm,
And there's a childlikeness about children's faith, children's perspective that I think Jesus embraced in his ministry and so often was missed by other people. So that guidance thing for me is really key because I think our impact in terms of our teaching rises or falls on whether we get that right.
And I think in
our
practice,
approach.
I'm just, what does guidance look like in practice? And the word that comes to my mind as you're talking is witness.
Yeah.
Because when you're a guide, you're on the journey with someone, you're walking with them, you're both on the journey, like you said. But it's that witness as opposed to doing something to, yeah, which is so key.
And so, and then the final one for me is one I still see churches struggle with is significance. So creating space, opportunity for young people to know they've got a significant contribution to make, that they matter, that what they bring matters, and there's space for it. So the quote I used often, and I still use it, is from Gladiator from 2001. So that's a long time ago as well. Is what we do in life echoes in eternity, which is Russell Crowe walking through a field of wheat and kind of slow motion, moving his hand through it, kind
With a
of talking
very like
about stuff.
husky, what we do in life.
I know, yeah, very husky kind of, but it's right near the beginning of the film, as he's challenging his men as they get ready for battle. But it links for me with Philippians, where Paul's writing and talks about, shine like stars in the universe as you hold out the word of life, and that idea of doing something that has a lasting impact as we seek to serve others. So there's the significance for what am I doing that's going to make a difference? And that isn't because I've bought this program. It's because I'm journeying with children and young people. And I'm thinking not just about tonight and what we need to get through, but where's this child going to be in 5 years or a decade? And why I do children's and youth ministry is I don't want to work with a 7 year old and then not know where they are when they're 17. I love working with both age groups. It's crazy to me working where we are now in terms of volunteering in children's youth ministry. Some of the kids that are going up to youth after Easter this academic term, and I'm like, no, they can't be. Um, but there's an amazingness for me about that, which is why I can't stop doing it really, because it's not a conveyor belt to me. It's like this next child, wow, where are they going to be in 4 or 5 years' time? I can't wait to see. So I'd love journeying with them to see what the journey looks like and all the rest of it. So, but that's about kind of having a perspective that's seeing what God's doing, but also thinking, where do we then create opportunity for them to find their place in the body of Christ, not just see themselves as a child in the church, but somebody with gifts, talents, ministry that they can bring, that they can serve, they can join in alongside. Um, and I don't know whether we're going to get into Heart's Ladder participation properly at some point. I've just mentioned it, and some of you might not know what that is, so we'll probably have to talk about it at some point. But essentially, it's about having a way of including children, young people, in how we do things well. And it's not tokenism, it's not manipulation, it's creating proper space for them to have agency and bring what they want to bring in that space. And so often we can learn so much from them. So creating space for significance. So those four things for me: acceptance, love, guidance, and significance. And I
Mm.
guess they have flowed from my practice. They've flowed from what I've seen happen. I guess the job interview gave me an opportunity to write stuff down and then formulated it as a thing that I felt actually these are my approaches that are linked intrinsically with values and kind of my why and what we've talked about before. All of it is a bit porous where those things feed into one another. They're not supposed to be completely separate things that sit apart, but they have to feed into each other. Otherwise, things don't hold together. You don't have a flower, you have bits of a flower. So it's recognizing the value of the stem, as Lisa's mentioned, and that approach enables things to happen well. We don't have a flower if we don't have a stem.
Mm.
There we go. Acceptance, love, guidance, and significance. But what I didn't realize, I guess, when I started doing that is how instinctively I was following along very similarly with something that you've subsequently been teaching me about and have been teaching as part of Wonderful Me, which is PACE. So, do you want to tell us a bit about PACE, which does work as an acronym, unlike ALGS, which doesn't?
But acceptance, love, guidance, significance is just brilliant. So it's fine. Yeah, so pace is when people come to me at Wonderful Me and kind of first say we'd really like some support, we want to think about what it looks like to journey well with kids, or we've got lots of kids that are neurodiverse, or we've got kids that have are really struggling with anxiety, whatever it is. Sorry, the first place I always suggest starting is pace, and I think that's because it's that recognition that the approach is so important, and it is often what makes it work or not work. And there are loads of strategies we can unpack, and often what people are really looking for is a quick fix. But actually, what's really going to give what you do health and structure, it is the approach that you bring. And so for me, pace is a tool that just really does that well. I guess a little bit like we were talking about earlier, um, of just how it is a bit of a woolly thing to talk about your approach.
Mm.
What PACE does is it just gives language, similar to acceptance, love, guidance, significance. It gives language to be able to articulate what does our approach look like. So if you're on our team, this is the way we're going to journey with these kids, because this is what we think is really important. And so PACE gives the kind of structure to have those conversations with teams. So it's an acronym. It was created by a guy called Dan Siegel. So he is just this brilliant kind of therapist, and kind of psychologist who works with children. He founded something called DDP, which is a way of therapy, journeying with children who've experienced extreme trauma. And so PACE was a tool that he created to talk about the approach that you bring in that kind of therapy space. But actually, I just think it's got so much of a wider use than that. And it's something that has been really picked up, particularly in kind of social services spaces. So it's often used to talk about how to journey well with children who have experienced trauma, who are adopted, who are in foster care. It's kind of a core tool that's often used with foster families. So it's brilliant. And actually that in and of itself is a good reason to really press into it, because if you've got families in your church who are fostering or who have adopted children, then actually you're speaking their language if you can press into PACE. And the more we can do to journey well with those families and stand with them and hold their hands up and cheer them on and champion them, the better. So it's really it's a really good tool. But we use it everywhere. So we have done training in our church with our preaching team a little while ago, just kind of exploring how we bring pace in our preaching because it just works. It's a good approach. So it's an acronym that stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. So there's a huge overlap with what you've been talking about in acceptance, love, guidance, significance. So
Mm.
playfulness is just that awareness of it's kind of not really talking about the importance of structured play, or although that's super important, but just in the approach that we bring. How do we journey playfully with children? Because actually a playful approach is such a good diffuser. Because if you've got kids that are struggling, who have had their buttons pressed, who are struggling and becoming, the language I use is dysregulated, they're not in an okay space, then actually, if you go in hard on that, then they're already in a space of kind of high alert and kind of on guard. And so all you do is put the heckles up even more. Whereas if you can go in playfully, it really diffuses that situation. That means you can then journey well with them and bring the care and support they need, the learning they need, whatever it is. So playfulness is amazing. Acceptance, I mean, links beautifully because it is one of the words that you said. Curiosity is so powerful, because it's just about noticing what's happening and asking why.
Mm.
Like we're back to the importance of why again, aren't we? But in a kind of, if you've got a kid who's struggling in a behavior situation, for example, I think a kind of traditional response to that is almost like cause and effect, like they do this, therefore the consequence is this. Whereas if instead of that, you kind of go in and take a step back and go, well, why? Why are they struggling in this space? And see behavior as communication, then we are better able to journey. So if you've got kids who are not engaging, well, why? What is it that means that they're struggling, and they're not able to engage? So just curiosity. But I mean, I could talk about curiosity for hours, to be
Well,
honest.
I also
So
one of
powerful.
just to interject.
Always.
Thank you. Well, not always, but yes, right now I will. But I think one of the things about curiosity I love is particularly it links for me with guidance, funnily enough. is because Jesus
Yeah,
was
yeah.
great asking questions. And I think it in our approach, how often we just so ready to give the answer rather than ask questions. And would Peter have made that amazing statement he made if Jesus hadn't been probing the disciples around kind of what they thought? Who do people say I am? Some say this, some say that. And then he kind of points at who do you say I am? So he's inviting them to say something that is from them. And I think so often we miss that. Even when we're doing teaching with young people, we could do some people think this, some people think this, and this is what I think, rather than what do you think? So Jesus' approach is brilliant, and I think
Yeah.
that's how we should do anything
And
is
so
approach Jesus.
this is why I love pace, because as you look at playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, empathy, when you look at Jesus and we read the Gospels, like the stories of his time on earth, you just see playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, empathy dripping out of every interaction that he has. So for me, although PACE as a kind of little acronym and tool is fairly new, for me, it's the Jesus way. Jesus was modeling it to us years and years and years and years and years ago before
Mm,
we even understood trauma. And but God did, because he made us. He knew how we worked and he knew what we needed, and he modeled that beautiful approach for us. And so for me, pace is a Jesus model, which is the other reason I love it. But yeah, curiosity is so powerful in so
yeah,
many ways, but also, like, you've talked about that, how we journey with kids, but also how do we help kids on their journey, the approach that children bring to their own journey. Like, do we encourage them to question?
mm,
Do we encourage them to be curious about what they're reading? And I think too often, when we're in that guru rather than guide mode, we're teaching them because we're telling them what they need to know,
yeah,
because we're almost fearful of them having questions. What if they question their faith? Well, actually, if they question their faith, brilliant, because unless they question it, they don't own it. And so we want kids to be curious. We want them to work it out, because we know that God is strong enough to hold that questioning. So why are we so fearful of it? So yeah, curiosity, we could do a series of podcasts on curiosity, I think.
maybe
Um,
maybe we should.
and then where are we at to? Playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, empathy is the last one. And that again is kind of just how do we, well, there's a really lovely quote by a lady called Margot Sunderland who talks about empathy as the ability to think, feel, and imagine what someone else is feeling. And it links really well with curiosity, because if we're bringing curiosity to what's going on for someone, then we're also, how do we imagine how they're feeling? How do we imagine what they're struggling with? How do we imagine what they're really relishing and what's really hitting it for them? So we do more of that as well. So just that importance of empathy, but seeing back to a lot of what you've talked about. How do we see kids? How do we
Mm,
really get to know our children, and journey with them, and walk well with them?
yeah. I guess my extra kind of thing would just be this is where for me story is so important
Mm,
around just how we understand what we're doing. Children turn up with a story of what's been going on in their lives in that day. Um, Children often live in the moment. So what's happened in the last 5 minutes is most prescient in their minds. Whereas we could be reflecting on, last week something dreadful happened and we're still ruminating over it. Kids so often are just in the present, in the moment. And I think a really key part for me about thinking through your approach is, are you present in the moment? If there was anything I'd add to approach that matters, is being present then and there, right
mm,
then, with the child as they come in, so that we're kind of immediately present. And so often when we're leading things, we're distracted by what's coming up or what we're planning next or what is happening through the evening, rather than literally, here are these kids, let's be present. Um, and and that for me, it enables the approach to come through. I think that being present and being willing to be present in the moment and journey with, as we've talked about, all of those things.
yeah, yeah. No, it's good. It's good. So yeah, those are kind of two little tools that we have drawn on. But I guess the key bit that I think I would like to shout loud about around about your how, about approach, is just the need to really nail it, to articulate it, to talk about it, to be really open about it. Um, and actually, I think, verging on more of a kind of paraclesis space, if we get our approach good and clear and we articulate it well, I think it's a really helpful tool in helping us build team in a healthy way. Because, we've all had people on our teams who are possibly not in the right space. um, Perhaps children's and youth ministry isn't for that moment what they should be doing. And those conversations are really tricky to have
Mm.
if that person hasn't necessarily recognized that. But actually, when your approach is tight and clear, it gives you a bit of a framework to have those tricky conversations that says, look, this is the way we want to go about it. And kind of, and either we want to work with you, to do that well, or maybe this isn't a good fit for you. But just the approach I think, is a really helpful way when it's clear. It structures that conversation well as well, and also just wider, less tricky conversations with team around. This is what we're here for. This is what we're passionate about. This is our program and what we're going to do. But you know what? This is also how we're going to make that happen well.
Yeah. I think one of the things that, again, thinking about things we sometimes say but don't reflect on well. So I'd often say to people, model what you want to see in terms of team. But if you're not clear on your model, what are you modeling? So you have to have an approach that means when you model it, people are like, oh, I get it now. So you have to nail your own approach in order to model something that people think, oh, that's how we're going to do it.
Yeah, yeah,
It's that's how so and so does a small group. That's why you've got some kids that gravitate to some leaders and not to others. It's not the resources or the activity they're doing. It's who they are. It's their personality and character, but also the approach they have to those kids. So notice that and think, well, that's what I want for all my team. So how do you train people who maybe are kind of not getting that? And how do you think actually maybe this isn't something that you can connect with or engage with well because the children's and youth ministry is not for you?
yeah, yeah. There's I'm just reminded of there's Dan Siegel is a psychologist who is brilliant. Like if you really want to explore any of the kind of neuroscience stuff, what that means, he does it really well in a really simple way. So his book Whole Brain Child, brilliant, massively recommend. But in Whole Brain Child, one of his kind of strategies, one of his tools is name it to tame it. And he's talking about it in a context of how we journey well with our kids when they're experiencing big emotions, big feelings. But actually, it's kind of just a good truth, really. Name it to tame it, which is massively about how do we make the implicit explicit. And I think approach massively fits with that.
Yeah.
How do we make what generally is implicitly understood, how do we make that explicit? So if we're looking at modeling something, it's good. We're also going to model it. We're going to do what we say we're going to do. But how are we explicit about what that model is? And naming it tames it.
Mhm.
So I think it's really helpful. But yeah, be clear, name it to tame it, make the implicit explicit, be really articulate about what the approach is as a team that you want to journey with. Great. So,
Great.
Al, next week we're going to go into session 5. It's exciting. Series episode 5. I don't
Yeah.
even know the podcast lingo. We'll get there. But we're going to be looking at the what. So we'll kind of unpack some of that next week. But before we finish episode 4, do you want to give us a bit of a take home, something we can mull over for the rest of the week and chew on?
So we've mentioned 8 words or seven if you say acceptance is there twice.
Yeah.
Is so I just wonder if it would be worth, if you haven't really thought about your approach or you're now thinking about it, is just take one of those words and think how does that resonate with me? or which one does resonate really with you as you think through those words? And how might that begin to be a place to start for you in terms of thinking about how you articulate your approach, how you're going to model what you want to see? Which stands out to you and thinks, yes, that in your spirit, you're going, yes, that's what I want us to press into as we go about what we're doing with young people and children. I want that to be core to our how. So pick one. Um, Sometimes we can go crazy and think, well, I'll have all eight, but just think, actually, let's just start with one if we haven't thought about it before, and press into that a little bit and see what God reveals to us. And then notice what we're doing that aligns with that as kind of, well, that is my approach. A bit like me discovering pace and realizing I was instinctively doing some of those things. So, yeah, that's what I would suggest.
Brilliant. And I guess just to finish with a bit of a plug, we mentioned in the last episode this kind of My Values resource that we are creating. Um, that is a tool to help people explore their values, but to look at four different aspects of values, two of which are very much about your why, and two of which are very much about your how. So if it is something you want to explore a little bit more, that is going to be ready soon, I
Mm.
reckon by February half term, hopefully, but certainly by Easter. So that'll be on the resource website. It'll be on Wonderful Me website. So yeah, keep an eye out for that as well. If you want to kind of explore this stuff a little bit further. But yeah, that's it for session 4. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. All the podcasty stuff. Give us a like, give us a share, whatever that means. And yeah, we're having fun. We'll see you next
See you
week
next time.
for episode 5. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.